pleasure that you are here and to welcome you in Bielefeld, which is not very famous for missionary studies or area studies, but the more we are very happy that you brought us some internationality and some transcultural international research here to Bielefeld. Giulia and me went quite a way together with our Nobili Transcultural and Soul Studies. We met a long time ago in Heidelberg, so the beginning of this project is the Heidelberg Cluster of Excellency, Asia and Europe in a global context. Maybe some of you have heard about it. This is interest in transculturality, which really was very important for me, but then you think they're all right, Said, Baba, everything is transcultural. But that is not the end, that is just the beginning, because I think the interesting question is, how does something become transcultural, and how? And then we have things that are still stay foreign and strange, and we have things like the potato in Germany, or maybe the tomato sauce in Italy, which is now to the core of identity, and it was not there in the 15th or 14th century. And so the question, what is transcultural, how is it transcultural, how it was a thing which interested us a lot. And of course, food is an easy thing to talk about. At the beginning, I was doing research about this transcultural dimensions of state. That was very difficult in Germany because the nation state, the European Western nation state, is really, I always said, the holy cow of German historiography. Yeah. So because this is the reason for all the greatness. So you cannot come and say, yeah, but the people learned in the 16th century how great China and the Mughal Empire and Japan is, and maybe they learned something. Yeah, cannot be difficult. So after we did this big thing, I thought another big thing is Christianity, which I think most of the people here know. It's very diverse. We have Christianities. It's quite different in different world areas. But normal people, yeah, who just think Christianity is one thing and Catholicism even more. It's one homogeneous thing, and it's very European and Western because that's a difference to the other. And so we started about transcultural dimensions about Christianity. And of course, then you go to missionaries, and I have a special linking to India, and that is the way the two of us met, because you already worked about Nobili, and we're thinking about transcultural dimension of Christianity, and then the question how to do it, we came to translation. Yeah, because the translation, you have to translate something, and this is not just a word, but it's, as you all know, certainly better than me, the difficult, what is the right word to translate it into, and how to do this in both directions. So this is where you can see how can you if you think about how can you translate it, in what concept you can translate something, then you really see how the transculturality emerges in some ways. We did a very nice conference in Oslo about translating catechisms, and one of the main topics we saw there is that marriage is always a big problem for the missionary context, which on the one hand, and also you know that, but that is our way to this conference, and so I tell you something you already know. In the Catholic Church, of course, it's very highly defined, and it's something very special and very difficult, but there are couples everywhere. You also have pair relations everywhere. This is the way to raise children, to transfer money, things. So this is there. So it's very difficult if the two did not fit. So you worked about it, Rufen Webster worked about Japan. And then we went on and did a lot of interesting things, but came back with this conference saying, marriage is the one thing, but the other thing is in general gender roles, yeah, which are very specific and are also a fundament of most societies, and it's difficult if the gender roles do not fit. And also there, the missionaries had normally a very clear idea how gender roles should function, so that was, in my experience, nice in India, rather difficult in Northern America, when suddenly women had a say. Yeah, so we thought we'd do something about gender roles as the idea that we can get to talk to each other. Gender roles are in many ways. It's also the question, how can we translate this Jesus who is living celibate around, which is not in every society a good thing. Yeah? So how can you translate that? And so that we are really also talking about the gender roles in our research. In the missionary context, we have as a keynote for today evening Christina Benninghaus. And I think most of you, I think the non-Bielefeld have never heard about her. She is an important gender historian. She's working about modernity. I will introduce her in detail in the evening, but just to say, because she really knows about the concepts. And we thought we hoped that it will broaden our horizon, that we not only talk about the missionary context, but have an idea about what can gender mean in a much broader context. So we have to try to refer. So we are also very interdisciplinary and inter-epochal in this respect. Mm-hmm. And after these more general words, I very much if they like to give the word to Giulia, who conceptualized this conference.
Thank you. Okay, so again, welcome to Bielefeld. It's a pleasure to see all of you here finally. I hope you will enjoy this short visit and that we can have an inspiring workshop. And for introducing you to these works, I'm going to explain a little bit and briefly what is behind and before today's works. And in particular, I want to conceptualize the theoretical framework of our project. So the idea of this workshop developed within a project led by Antje Flüchter, Professor of Early Modern History here at Bielefeld University, and me, titled as Translation as Practice, Translating Practices, Roberto Nobili as Missionary between Cultures, Religions, and Societies. This project is part of a big area of studies, which is SPP 2130, which is about early modern translation cultures. And we have today here with us another member of the SPP, Katja Triplet. She is the Senior Research Fellow in Leipzig, and I will give you soon the stage since she will be the first speaker. I'm now going to present three main central themes of our theoretical framework. On these central arguments, we have shaped the workshop abstract, although I will mention many theories, but I hope they can suggest some ideas for our discussion. As you can see, the main arguments of our project are the cultural encounter in early modern missionary context, cultural translation as missionary practice, the construction of gender roles. So the starting point, the position of the Catholic Pontifical Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, written at the Article 59 of the Dignitas Infinitas, released the 25th of March of this year, stated, it needs to be emphasized that biological sex and the sociocultural role of sex, so gender, can be distinguished but not separated. By looking at the cultural encounter in early modern missionary context, our project investigates through the history the process of constructing cultural and religious concepts, rules, and practices. And by this perspective, it aims to point up the mutability of cultural and religious concepts constructed performatively through the centuries as dynamic stages of a continuous and never-ending process of translation and negotiation. During the cultural encounter, when the different social groups try to communicate with each other, boundaries can be crossed, ideas connected, mixed, and mingled, or new kind of boundaries and cultural differences are generated. In the cultural encounter, cultural religious concepts and practices are reshaped, decodified, and recodified by a timeless process of translations and negotiation of cultural grids. So I want to quote Pascal Boyer, who stated, people communicated with other people, they meet individuals with similar or different notions or values, they change or maintain or discard their ways of thinking because of these encounters, and so forth. What we call the culture is the outcome of all these particular encounters. The missionary context is a contact zone, an interconnective space of boundaries, a third space of in-betweenness, characterized by the realization of a number of possible identities, multiple attachments, and cross-cultic identities, defined as transcultural. Transculturality expresses the structural cultural dynamism of cultures and religions. The missionary context is a favorite cultural framework for the study of transculturality. In the cultural encounter, religious has a central role. It is a transfer of culture, an act of bringing cultural, social, and political message. It can be an instrument of communication, a way of circulating knowledge, or a symptom of incommensurability and untranslatability. The historian Giuseppe Marcocci argued that in early modern time, missionaries connected in a global network established a missionary culture and praxis. The missionary culture promoted the complexity and diversity of a transcultural Christendom as a consistent part of the Christian identity. The missionaries represented both the efforts of the Catholic Church to build a modern papal principality in its spirit of evangelization and conversely, they revealed the strong sense of discomfort surrounding the application of the Tridentine norms and decrees, and carried forward the request for accommodation and negotiation of Catholic creeds. The missionary Catholicism emphasizes the polycentricity and transculturality of Christianity. Now the challenge is to describe this complex morphology. To this end, our project focuses on the process of cultural translation as a missionary practice. The missionary context is a translation zone where the production of knowledge and the construction of religions is inextricably intertwined with the process of translating cultural creeds. In this process of negotiation, the missionaries acted as cultural brokers. They translated religious texts to the local audience in order to communicate Christianity to the local people. At the same time, they translated texts from local cultures to absorb local languages and social practices, and to report this knowledge to their ecclesiastical superiors. Besides translating texts, the missionaries were engaged in a cultural translation of everyday practices. They had to translate sacramental rituals like baptism or marriage, the modes of dressing, food and dietary prescriptions, religious worship, rituals of purification and bodily practices, practices of social differentiation and social hierarchy. But in the process of translation, the missionary translator is not the only actor. Translation is never a one-way process, but rather a reciprocal process of communication and exchange. The local actors decodified, disclosed, and translated their own context for the missionary to understand. They brought their contributes and cultural items to the negotiation process. Moreover, they translated, transferred, and integrated the missionary translation into their own conceptual prison system. So looking at the missionary context by the perspective of cultural translation helps us to focus on the local actors, not just a passive receiver, but to unearth their active role. To this end, we adopt some theories from cultural translation studies as a toolkit for historical analysis. So as you can see from the slide, first of all, as theorized by Eugene Nida, we cannot conceive the translation in terms of faithful reproduction of an original source, but we analyze translation as recreation, reshaping, recodification connected with the source and the target by dynamic equivalencies, which means that the translation is aimed to keep an equivalent effect to the audience as it was between the source and the receivers. This dynamic equivalence swings between the poles of domestication and foreignization. As defined by Lawrence Venuti, a foreignized translation carries the greed of the source culture, while the domestication reflects the domestic values, beliefs, and representation of the target culture, which the translator adopts and describes in it. Therefore, the choice to position the translation closer to the foreign source culture or to reflect and adopt domestic character of the audience is a political act which defines which conceptual grids of the foreign culture or target culture will prevail and become part of the translation and of receiving cultures. The intermediary role gives to this translation a priority in shaping and constructing religions and cultures. Indeed, it has a powerful force of innovation by introducing new forms, genres, or ideas, or can be a major factor for conservationism when the translators are out of touch with innovatory trends. In any case, translation is a primary instrument through which one culture learns about another one. It is important to investigate how the definition of religious phenomena is based on the process of translating religions and how different translations have determined different understandings of religions and religious cultural concepts in the past and may continue to do so in the present. Okay, so coming to the specific topic of today, the construction of gender concept and gender role. A famous assertion of Jan Scott in his work, Gender, a Useful Category of Historical Analysis, appeared in American Historical Reviews in 1986. And it states, gender, considered in its examination as an analytical category, is a social category imposed on a sexed body. Gender as an analytical category allows us to take in historical account the multi-dimensions of social history. the biological aspect, body, bodily practices, corporality, the cultural, social representations, symbolism, practices, social distinction and discriminations, the political and institutional history, marriage, priesthood, patriarchy, and finally the individual and emotional sphere, sexuality, masculinity, femininity, virginity, chastity. The gender approach, understood both as a heuristic model and analytical perspective, allows us to relate the biological data and the emotional sphere of the individual with the cultural, social, and political representations. Gender is a category that fundamentally structures most societies and is therefore also most central in the context of religion. The missionary religious context involves the religious institutional authorities to delimit orthodoxy and to determine patterns and archetypes. Furthermore, gender concepts and gender roles are produced performatively by practice. And here I put the concept of doing gender, coined by Butler and West Zimmerman. Therefore, they are constructed in a social context by social interaction, which implies a process of cultural translation, intra or interlanguages. By focusing on cultural translation, we can unearth the process of domestication of organization of the different textual conceptual grids, that is to say, the selection of concept and practice, both from the source of for the target cultural context. To this purpose, I want to show some examples from my case study. I investigate the missionary cultural translation of the Italian Jesuit Roberto Nobili, who firstly attempted to translate Catholicism into Tamil in the Jesuit mission of Madurai in South India to the Tamil Nadu in the 17th century. And in his Tamil catechetical literature, the translation of the institution of marriage, the ministry of priesthood, and the dimension of holiness are central. A long passage of 52 pages in Nobili Tamil Catechism Jnanopadesham explains the institution of marriage translated in Sanskrit as Vivaha Dharma, which I would literally translate as Code of Married Life. Marriage is a fundamental social institution in most societies, and at the same time it has countless forms. It is a central way to organize sexual relations, the transfer of goods and heritage, the production and education of children, and it is built on the staging and reproducing of gender relations. Moreover, its social legitimation is often anchored in religion. For Catholic missionaries, marriage presented several problems. Catholic marriage was a sacrament and difficult to accommodate to local customs. Furthermore, marriage defined a couple union and couple life as monogamous, which marked the boundary with many local practices. Nobili's translation carried the foreignized character of the couple monogamous union, but its description is domesticated in the local grids of rituals and practices. In fact, in Nobili's translation, marriage loses the sacramentality it had in the post-Tridentine period, and instead becomes a concept social determinant for the social structure. Therefore, marriage is described as the natural union legitimized by the act of God with the creation of the archetypal couple, Adam and Eve. Men and women realize the design of God in procreating and perpetuating human genealogies within the couple heterosexual union. In Jnanopadesham, a long part about the translation of marriage concerned a harsh criticism against polygamy, polyandry, incest, and sexual affairs out of marriage, with a detailed description of the physical and intellectual negative consequences of these practices. Another long part clarifies the equal duties and responsibilities of both the parents, the father and the mother, in the family life and the education of the children. A pivotal part in Nobili's translation of gender roles is the translation of the dimension of sanctity and the ministry of priesthood. This is a fundamental category in constructing gender roles since it marks social distinctions and differentiations. Besides gender and social status, there is the difference between clergy and laity. This difference was constituted not by birth but by rituals, that is ordination, and was also reproduced by social practices, most of all chastity, culminating in the institution of celibacy. The definition of holiness defines the values and the features which men and women should aspire to. The translation of priesthood determines a social role, a religious social hierarchy, and the access to the structure of power. In Nobilis works, both the translation of holiness and the translation of priesthood are deeply discussed. In Jnanopadesha, holiness is strictly connected with the conceptual grids of virginity and purity. It is translated with the Tamil word parisuttam from the Sanskrit parisuddha, which means purity, immaculateness, cleanness as of dress, clearness as of water. It is interesting to note that Nobili addressed his teaching to both men and women, but holiness is described and exemplified by the life of Virgin Mary, defined with the Tamil Kanyastiri, which means literally virgin, and now is used in Tamil terminologies for nuns. Interestingly, Mary is described by the images of a traveler in the world, which is literally translated in Tamil, a endless ocean of all the good things, and always absorbed in meditation, characterized by the ability of controlling her feelings continuously and also during the sleep. And here I would open a bracket about the picture of our flyer, since this is an artwork of a contemporary Italian artist, Mario Trudi, which is called Lei, she, but it's remaking of the 15th century portrait of Annunciated, the Antonello da Messina, an Italian artist who is now in an art gallery in Sicily. And I found it interesting because despite the new art techniques, so new materials, colors, but it keeps this gaze of Mary, which is described as looking forward, looking out of the picture, maybe looking at the Gabriel, the archangel. In any way, she is described as absorbed in meditation. And so she's still absorbed in meditation, so in this, through this picture. The ministry of priesthood is translated by Nobili as the sannyasin, which I would translate as renunciation, asceticism, monasticism, and it is addressed to both men and women. But the missionary, the role of the missionary is translated as guru, a spiritual leader, for remarking the role of the male missionary as a spiritual guide, a master for disciples, characterized by the capacity of guidance and inspired by the life of Jesus. A last consideration I would mention is about taking into the account the role of the missionary translator. Nobili, as a Jesuit missionary, is embedded in a male and masculine missionary entourage, which influences the process of writing and transmitting information. So as a conclusion, I leave some questions. For our global perspective and for our discussion. What are the practices and the conceptual grids chosen to translate gender roles and concepts? Can we find patterns? Which factors influence the translation of gender roles? Personality of the translator, situations, power relations, audience. Are these translations domesticated on the grids of the local actors or foreignized, carrying the grids of the missionary source context? By focusing on the reception, can we find hints how the local actors appropriated missionary translations, if they accepted or rejected or modified the respective practices, and how did the missionary translation become part of the public discourse, or did they cooperate the construction of the gender roles and concepts? Thank you for your attention.